Ashwick was the kind of town where the cobblestones remembered every footstep. Evenings arrived soft and gray, wrapping narrow streets in mist. The lamps along Lantern Lane glowed like pale moons, casting pools of buttery light onto ivy-choked brick walls. Emma Hartley, arms tucked into the sleeves of her coat, walked home with her breath fogging the air. The hush of the hour soothed her. Shops were shuttered, save for a few twinkling window displays, and somewhere far off, a church bell chimed midnight. She passed Lantern Lane almost every night. The house sat halfway down the lane, hidden behind a wrought iron fence and a mass of twisting vines. Paint peeled from its wooden eaves. The shutters hung crooked as if the windows were tired of looking out. People in Ashwick said no one had lived there for 50 years. Some called it cursed. Others said it was simply forgotten. Emma, a librarian by trade and a quiet observer by nature, felt only curiosity when she saw it. Tonight something new caught her eye, a faint glow behind the second-floor window. She slowed, peering through gaps in the ivy. A flicker, like the soft swaying of a lantern. She stopped, frozen in place, the cool air prickling her skin. Emma blinked, half convinced she'd imagined it. She leaned closer. There it was again, a soft, golden shimmer moving gently across the glass. For a long moment, she stood on the pavement, listening to the hush of the wind weaving through the branches overhead. Then she glanced up and down the street. No one else was around. Finally, her curiosity won. She pushed open the old iron gate, which let out a long, creaking wail. The sound echoed off the neighboring houses. Ivy brushed against her legs as she stepped onto the cracked stone path. She paused at the bottom of the steps. The wooden porch looked like it might collapse under a single footstep. Cobwebs draped from the balustrade like delicate lace. From inside the house came a faint rustle, like silk moving over dry wood. Emma swallowed. "Hello?" she whispered, though she felt slightly ridiculous talking to an empty house. "Is someone there?" No answer came, only the gentle sigh of wind and the flutter of dry leaves. Emma shifted her weight, peering up at the glowing window. The lantern light flickered as though someone paced inside, casting long shadows across the glass. Her pulse thudded in her throat. She placed a foot on the bottom step. The wood let out a deep groan under her weight. She paused, half expecting the entire porch to collapse into the cellar below. When it held, she took another careful step, gripping the railing for balance. Closer now, she could see through the film of dust on the front window. The hallway beyond was dim but touched with soft, golden light, as though a single lantern illuminated old wallpaper peeling in thin curls. A shape moved inside, a woman, tall and slender, her hair pinned into an elegant bun. She wore a gown of pale gray silk, its skirts rustling with each step. Her face was turned away as she seemed to search shelves along the hall, lifting objects and peering beneath them, as though hunting for a lost treasure. Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. She opened her mouth, intending to speak, but a sudden chill swept over her skin, and every hair on her arms rose. Then, as if sensing Emma's presence, the woman slowly turned. Their eyes met through the dusty glass. Emma's heart hammered so loudly she was sure the woman must hear it. The woman's face was delicate and pale, almost luminous under the lantern's glow. Her eyes were large, dark as polished walnut, and filled with a sadness that seemed older than the walls around her. Her lips parted slightly, as though she were about to speak. Emma's throat felt dry. She whispered, "Who are you?" Inside, the woman tilted her head, as if she was listening for distant music. Then, ever so gently, she lifted the lantern higher, casting light in a soft circle around her. Emma saw fragments of the hallway, a faded rug, framed paintings crooked on the walls, a staircase climbing into gloom. A soft rustling sound rose around Emma, like dry leaves swirling across stone. The ivy trembled on the walls. "Help me!" the woman mouthed, though no sound reached Emma's ears. Emma took a step back, uncertain if she truly heard or imagined it. Suddenly, the lantern's flame flared brighter, flooding the hall with a golden glow. Shadows danced wildly across the walls, and the woman's figure wavered like a reflection in rippling water. Emma stumbled backward off the porch step, nearly losing her balance. The chill in the air deepened, coiling around her like invisible fingers. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. Through the glass, the lantern's glow began to fade, shrinking inward until only a faint glimmer remained. The woman's figure grew translucent, as though dissolving into the air itself. Her eyes lingered on Emma with a pleading softness that tugged at Emma's heart. "Wait," Emma said, voice trembling. She reached a hand toward the glass, but her fingers touched only cold, dusty panes. The woman seemed to sigh. Then the light blinked out, leaving the hallway swallowed in darkness. Emma stood frozen, hands still raised. The silence pressed in all around her, dense and echoing. Only the wind whispered through the ivy, brushing against the eaves like soft fingers. After several moments, Emma lowered her arm. Her thoughts tumbled over one another, questions she couldn't begin to answer. A soft voice behind her made her jump. "Miss Hartley, what on earth are you doing out here at this hour?" Emma spun around to find Mrs. Hargrove standing on the sidewalk, wrapped in a heavy knitted shawl. Her gray hair was tucked under a hat, and her eyes, sharp and inquisitive, glimmered beneath the lamplight. I saw someone in the house," Emma stammered. Mrs. Hargrove let out a long sigh. "Oh, child, don't you go meddling with Lantern Lane." Emma blinked at Mrs. Hargrove, trying to find her voice. "But there was someone in there. A woman, carrying a lantern. I saw her clear as day." Mrs. Hargrove pursed her lips and shuffled closer, leaning heavily on her cane. "You saw her, then?" Emma's eyes widened. "You know about this?" Mrs. Hargrove cast a wary glance at the house, as though afraid it might overhear. "People think that place is empty, but the house has never truly been empty, Miss Hartley. It's been waiting. And sometimes, it calls to folk with curious minds." Emma shivered. "Calls to them how?" "Dreams. Whispers. Lights in the windows." Mrs. Hargrove tilted her head. "Tell me, have you been dreaming of the house?" Emma opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had been dreaming lately, vague, half-remembered visions of flickering lights and rustling silk. She'd thought they were just scraps of her imagination. I'm not sure," she admitted. Mrs. Hargrove touched Emma's arm gently. "That woman you saw? She's been searching for something ever since she died. Nobody knows what it is, but she won't leave until she finds it." Emma swallowed hard. "Who was she?" "Her name was Lydia Fairchild. Lived there in the late 1800s. Married the man who built the house. Some say she disappeared one stormy night, lantern in hand, never to be seen again, until she started showing up like a will-o'-the-wisp." Emma glanced at the dark windows, heart pounding. "What happened to her?" Mrs. Hargrove shook her head slowly. "That, child, is a story tangled in secrets. And secrets have a way of finding folks who go looking." A damp breeze rustled Emma's hair as she stared at Mrs. Hargrove. Lantern Lane suddenly felt darker, the air thicker somehow. "But if Lydia's still searching," Emma whispered, "maybe someone should help her. Maybe that's why she's appearing." Mrs. Hargrove gave a soft snort. "That's how folk get into trouble. The past has sharp edges, my dear. It can cut you when you dig too deep." Emma hugged her arms around herself. "I don't want to be afraid of some house." Mrs. Hargrove's expression softened. She patted Emma's arm gently. "You've a kind heart, Emma. But be careful. Some ghosts don't want help, they just want company in their misery." Emma glanced again at the looming house, its windows black and empty. The wind hissed through the ivy like a secret being whispered. Mrs. Hargrove began to shuffle away. "Go home now. Get some sleep. Let the dead keep their own business." Emma watched her disappear into the drifting fog. She lingered another moment at the gate, half hoping the lantern light might return. But the house remained still and silent. With a final uneasy glance, Emma turned and hurried down the lane, her footsteps echoing off the damp stones. As she reached the corner, she glanced back one last time. A pale glimmer flickered behind the second-floor window, so brief she almost doubted it. But it was there. And deep down, Emma knew she couldn't simply forget the woman in the house on Lantern Lane. Emma didn't sleep well that night. She tossed and turned, blankets twisting around her like vines. Every time she drifted off, she found herself standing in the dark hallway of the house on Lantern Lane. In her dreams, the air smelled of old wood and rain-soaked earth. Wallpaper peeled away in thin curls. A soft glow bobbed at the far end of the hall, a lantern swinging gently in an invisible breeze. "Help me!" The voice was so close she could feel it on her skin, like a whisper against her cheek. She turned and saw Lydia standing beneath the staircase. The ghost-pale dress shimmered like smoke. Her dark eyes were filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to echo through the walls. Emma tried to speak, but her voice came out as a faint croak. "What do you need me to do?" Lydia lifted her lantern, illuminating a set of dusty stairs leading upward. Beyond them yawned an archway draped in cobwebs. "Find the truth," Lydia murmured, "before he locks it away forever." Emma took a step toward her, but the hallway suddenly stretched like taffy, the walls pulling away, floorboards groaning beneath invisible weight. A wind roared through the house, scattering scraps of yellowed paper around her. "Wait!" Emma cried. But the lantern light winked out, plunging her into darkness. Emma woke with a gasp, clutching her pillow. Morning sunlight filtered through her curtains, but her room felt strangely cold. Emma sat up in bed, rubbing her temples. Her heart still thudded as though she'd been running. The echoes of Lydia's voice lingered in her ears, "before he locks it away forever." She swung her legs over the side of the bed. Morning sunlight streamed across the floor, painting warm stripes over her worn carpet. Yet even the brightness couldn't chase away the chill clinging to her skin. She tried to push the dream from her mind as she got ready for work. But each time she closed her eyes, she saw Lydia's sorrowful gaze. At the Ashwick Public Library, the familiar scent of paper and old wood usually comforted her. Today, however, the hush between the shelves felt heavy. Mrs. Simmons, the senior librarian, peered at Emma over her glasses. "You look pale, dear. Not sleeping?" Emma hesitated. "Just strange dreams." Mrs. Simmons nodded gravely. "Full moon last night. Always stirs up old spirits." Emma blinked. "You believe in ghosts?" Mrs. Simmons gave a mysterious smile. "In Ashwick, it's wise to keep an open mind." Emma paused at the circulation desk, staring into the shadows between the shelves. The house, the lantern, Lydia's sad eyes, it all seemed impossible and yet painfully real. She knew one thing, she couldn't ignore it. During her lunch break, she slipped into the local history section, pulling out a battered folder labeled Fairchild, Lydia. She opened it slowly, as though afraid the pages might bite. Yellowed newspaper clippings spilled from the folder, edges brittle as dried leaves. Emma carefully gathered them and began to read. Ashwick Gazette, October 1887. Mystery surrounds disappearance of Lydia Fairchild. Mrs. Lydia Fairchild, wife of prominent merchant Thomas Fairchild, has vanished under troubling circumstances. Neighbors report seeing her leave her home on Lantern Lane during a storm, carrying a lantern. She has not been seen since. Rumors persist of marital discord and secrets within the Fairchild household. Emma's brow furrowed. She flipped to another article. Ashwick Times, November 1887. Search called off for missing woman. Despite exhaustive efforts, authorities have found no trace of Mrs. Lydia Fairchild. Mr. Fairchild insists his wife fled due to female hysteria. Residents, however, whisper of strange lights in the Fairchild house at night. Emma frowned. Female hysteria. Typical of the era to dismiss a woman's disappearance so casually. She scanned further and found an aged photograph tucked between the papers. Lydia stared out from it, elegant in her high-neck gown, her dark eyes holding that same haunting sadness Emma had seen through the window. Emma touched the photo gently. "What happened to you?" she murmured. Suddenly, she felt a cool draft sweep across her neck. She turned, expecting someone behind her, but the library aisle stood empty, only dust motes swirling in a sunbeam. Emma exhaled shakily. She knew now she had to learn the truth. Emma slipped Lydia's photo into her bag, heart pounding. She needed answers. Answers that dusty articles couldn't fully provide. That evening, as dusk fell over Ashwick, Emma found herself once again standing at the iron gate of the Fairchild house. The wind rustled the ivy, sending faint rattling whispers through the leaves. She took a breath and stepped inside. The path crunched under her shoes as she approached the porch. The wooden boards groaned in protest, but she pushed forward, driven by a mix of fear and determination. "Lydia?" she called softly, her voice barely rising above the breeze. "I found your picture. I want to help you." Silence. She pressed her palm to the front door. The wood felt icy, even in the warmth of the lingering summer night. She tried the handle, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The knob turned under her fingers. The door swung inward with a low, aching creak, releasing a breath of stale, cold air. Emma hesitated on the threshold, listening to the distant tick of a clock echoing from deep inside the house. Summoning her courage, she stepped across the threshold. Inside, the hallway stretched before her, dimly lit by moonlight spilling through the windows. Dust floated in pale beams, and the scent of mildew hung in the air. Paintings lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow her. A staircase curved upward into shadow. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked, as though someone was shifting their weight carefully. Emma called out again, her voice trembling. "Lydia?" A faint glow pulsed at the top of the stairs. Emma stared up the staircase, heart thundering. The glow shimmered like candlelight, brightening then dimming as if breathing. She placed her foot on the bottom step. It groaned beneath her weight. Taking slow, measured breaths, she ascended. Each step released a faint puff of dust into the air, and her fingers traced the banister, feeling the ridges worn smooth by countless hands. Halfway up she froze. A whisper drifted down from the landing above. "Emma!" Her name. Clear and unmistakable, spoken in a voice like silk rustling over stone. Emma swallowed hard. "Lydia?" Silence. She climbed the final steps and reached the landing. The glow came from the open doorway of a room at the end of the hall. The air there felt cooler, charged with an almost electric tension. She approached slowly, peering inside. The room was a bedroom. Moonlight slanted across a large four-poster bed draped in gauzy curtains. The wallpaper, once elegant floral print, peeled in great swaths, revealing dark plaster beneath. A vanity table stood against the wall, its mirror cracked like a spiderweb. And there, beside the bed, stood Lydia. She looked even more solid than before, as though the veil between worlds had grown thinner. Her lantern glowed brightly, casting trembling shadows across the ceiling. Lydia turned to Emma, her dark eyes shining with urgency. "You must find the key," she whispered. "He's hidden it. He doesn't want the truth to come out." Emma stepped closer. Who? Who hid it?" But Lydia only shook her head, eyes full of fear. Emma's voice quivered. "Please, Lydia. Who are you talking about?" Lydia gazed at her with eyes dark as wet ink. "He watched me. Even in my own house. Always listening. Always waiting." Emma swallowed. "Your husband? Thomas Fairchild?" Lydia lowered her eyes. "He kept secrets in this house. Secrets in locked rooms." Emma shivered as Lydia stepped closer, lantern light flaring between them. The ghost smelled faintly of lavender and something old and dry, like crumbling paper. Lydia whispered, "The key opens the place where he hid everything. Letters, ledgers, the truth." Emma dared to ask, "Why did you leave that night? During the storm?" Lydia's eyes filled with tears that shimmered like tiny crystals. Her lips moved soundlessly for a moment before she managed to speak. "I found out. About him. About the things he did. I tried to escape. But the storm. She raised a trembling hand to her throat, as if choking on memory. Emma's heart twisted. She wanted to comfort Lydia, but her fingers passed through the ghost's arm like mist. "Where's the key?" Emma asked softly. Lydia took a shaky breath. "Look, behind the clock." Emma blinked. "What clock?" But before Lydia could answer, a deep vibration shuddered through the floorboards. A heavy thump echoed from downstairs, as though something enormous had slammed shut. Lydia's eyes went wide with fear. "He's coming!" Then, with a sound like a candle being snuffed out, Lydia vanished, leaving only the lantern's glow fading into darkness. Emma staggered back, the sudden emptiness pressing in like a weight. Emma stood alone in the bedroom, chest heaving. The silence felt immense, pressing against her ears until she could hear her own pulse like a distant drum. She forced herself to move, stepping out into the hallway. The boards creaked beneath her feet, protesting every shift of her weight. A faint scent of burning oil lingered, as though Lydia's lantern glow had left its trace in the air. "Behind the clock," Emma whispered, repeating Lydia's words. She descended the stairs cautiously, each step groaning underfoot. When she reached the main hall, she paused, scanning the dim space. Then she saw it, a tall grandfather clock standing sentinel near the parlor door. Its carved wood gleamed dully in the moonlight, and its brass pendulum swung with slow, deliberate grace. Emma approached it, fingertips brushing the carved designs. It felt colder than any other surface in the house. She examined the clock carefully, running her fingers along its edges. Near the base, her thumb caught on a small latch almost hidden in the woodwork. Heart pounding, she flipped the latch. A panel in the clock's side swung open with a soft click. Inside was a shallow compartment, layered in dust. Nestled within lay a small iron key, tarnished and old. Emma stared at it, afraid to touch it, as though it might burn her skin. She reached in slowly and closed her fingers around the cold metal. Suddenly, from the darkness behind her, a voice rumbled low and furious. "You shouldn't be here!" Emma spun around, eyes wide. A tall, shadowy figure stood at the far end of the hall. She could barely make out the shape of a man, dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by the gloom. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The man's silhouette loomed taller as he stepped forward, the wooden floor groaning under his boots. "Who are you?" Emma demanded, gripping the key so tightly the iron edges bit into her palm. The man's voice was like gravel grinding together. "Leave this place. Some secrets should stay buried." Emma tried to see his face, but shadows clung to him, refusing to let the moonlight reveal his features. "This is Lydia's house," Emma said, voice trembling. "She wants the truth known. What are you hiding?" The man tilted his head slowly, as though studying her. "You don't know what you're meddling with. You'll only bring suffering, for yourself and for her." Emma felt her resolve stiffen. "Did you hurt her? Did Thomas Fairchild hurt Lydia?" Silence stretched so long that Emma feared he'd vanished like a wisp of smoke. Then he spoke again, softer but edged with threat. "The past has claws. Dig into it, and you'll bleed." Emma took a shaky step back. "I'm not afraid of you. You should be." He raised his arm, and the shadows around him seemed to thicken, like black cloth billowing in a phantom wind. A bitter chill swept the hall, making the lanterns on the wall flicker wildly. Emma blinked, and suddenly, the man was gone. The hall fell silent except for the tick-tock of the grandfather clock behind her. Emma pressed a hand to her chest, struggling to calm her racing heart. She glanced at the iron key in her palm, now slick with sweat. Whatever it opened, Lydia wanted her to find it. And whoever that man was, he wanted her to stop. Emma stood for a long time in the hush of the hallway, the iron key cold and heavy in her hand. She glanced at the front door, half tempted to flee the house entirely. But then she thought of Lydia's eyes, dark with sorrow, and felt resolve settle over her like armor. She slipped the key into her coat pocket and crept deeper into the house. Dust stirred beneath her feet as she passed through a narrow passage leading toward the back. She found herself in a study. Shelves crowded the walls, stuffed with ledgers, books, and brittle papers that smelled of age and secrets. A broad mahogany desk stood beneath the window, draped in a thin veil of dust. Emma hesitated, then tugged at the desk drawers. Each was stuffed with yellow documents, receipts, and handwritten letters in looping Victorian script. She rifled through them, hoping for a clue. At the bottom of one drawer, her fingers touched something metal. She pulled it out. A small ornate lockbox, its brass surface etched with swirling patterns. A keyhole glinted in the lantern light. Heart quickening, Emma retrieved the iron key from her pocket. It slid into the lock perfectly. With a tiny click, the box sprang open. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. Emma lifted the bundle, feeling the brittle texture of ancient paper beneath her fingers. A faint voice seemed to whisper at her ear, as though Lydia herself was standing beside her. "Read them." Emma untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter, ink faded but legible. Her eyes widened as she began to read the words that would change everything she thought she knew about Thomas Fairchild, and about the house on Lantern Lane. The letter trembled in Emma's hands as she read the spidery script. "My dearest Lydia, I beg you, burn these words when you've finished. I cannot abide the thought of them falling into Thomas's hands. You must know, your husband is not the man you believe him to be. His dealings reach far beyond mere trade. He has grown wealthy from secrets, and from ruin. Men have disappeared. Debts are collected in blood. And now he fears you know too much. Please, my friend, leave Ashwick while you still can. E.H." Emma stared at the signature E.H. Who was that? A friend of Lydia's? Another victim of Thomas Fairchild's secrets? She shuffled through the other letters, scanning phrases that made her blood run cold. "He's hiding ledgers that prove everything. There are secret rooms beneath the house. I fear for your life, Lydia." Emma pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. Thomas Fairchild had been celebrated as a pillar of Ashwick society, yet these letters painted a portrait of a man steeped in darkness and corruption. Suddenly, a chill swept through the study. Papers fluttered on the desk. Emma's lantern sputtered, casting wild shadows across the shelves. A soft voice echoed through the room. "Emma, you must find the ledgers." Emma turned. Lydia stood in the doorway, her lantern casting a gentle glow. This time, sorrow and urgency mingled in her expression. "They're hidden beneath the floor," Lydia whispered. "Under the rug in Thomas's office. Please, before he comes back." Emma stared at her, barely able to breathe. Emma found her voice at last. "Lydia, why me? Why show me all of this?" Lydia's gaze seemed to pierce through her. "Because you're the only one who listens. The only one who sees me." Emma's throat tightened. "I'm just a librarian." Lydia's eyes glistened with spectral tears. "You're more than that. You care about the truth. And the truth must be set free." A low rumble shook the floorboards beneath their feet. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. Lydia flinched, lantern quivering in her grasp. "He knows you're here," Lydia whispered. "He's trying to stop you." Emma steeled herself. "I'm not leaving without those ledgers." Lydia nodded once, solemn as a priestess. "Then hurry. The hiding place is beneath the red rug. The boards lift away." Emma hesitated, wanting to ask 1,000 questions, but Lydia was already fading. Her glow diminished like a dying candle until she dissolved into drifting motes of pale light. The chill remained, lingering in the corners of the room like a silent warning. Emma clenched her fists. She couldn't turn back now. Moving quickly, she retraced her steps into the front hall, her lantern casting trembling circles of light. She pushed open a heavy door marked Private Office. Inside, she found a room of dark wood paneling, a massive oak desk, and a crimson rug laid across the floor. The air smelled of old leather and stale cigar smoke, as though Thomas Fairchild might stride in at any moment. Emma crossed to the rug and dropped to her knees. Her fingers searched along the edges until she found a seam in the floorboards. Heart pounding, she worked her nails under the edge and pulled. The board lifted with a creak, revealing a dark cavity beneath. Emma held her breath as cool air wafted up from the hidden space. She lowered her lantern, its glow illuminating wooden steps descending into darkness. A hidden cellar. Just as Lydia had said. She hesitated on the threshold, every instinct warning her to run. But then she pictured Lydia's face, the silent plea in her eyes, and gathered her courage. Clutching the lantern, she descended carefully into the shadows. The steps creaked under her weight, sounding impossibly loud in the hush. At the bottom, her lantern revealed stone walls slick with moisture. Shelves lined the chamber, stacked with boxes, papers, and ledger books tied in neat bundles. Dust coated everything in a thick, velvety layer. Emma stepped closer and lifted one of the ledgers. Even the leather binding felt heavy with secrets. She opened it cautiously and scanned the columns of faded ink. Names. Dates. Amounts paid. Besides some entries were words that made her skin crawl. Silenced. Disposed of. Debt cleared. Permanent solution. Emma felt sick. This wasn't simple accounting, it was a record of blackmail, extortion, and possibly murder. She flipped further, finding pages listing prominent names from Ashwick's past: merchants, councilmen, clergy. The web of corruption seemed to touch every corner of the town. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from above. Slow, deliberate. Floorboards groaned under a weight that seemed impossibly heavy. Emma froze, lantern trembling in her grasp. A voice drifted down the stairs, soft as velvet and cold as stone. I warned you, Miss Hartley. Now it's too late to leave. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. She backed deeper into the cellar, clutching the ledger to her chest. From the shadows at the top of the stairs, a figure emerged. The same man she'd seen in the hallway, tall and broad-shouldered, his face still obscured by darkness. I told you not to pry, he said, voice echoing off the damp stone walls. Some truths are better left buried. Emma's voice came out in a shaky whisper. Who are you? The man stepped closer. For a heartbeat, the lantern light caught his features, sharp cheekbones, hollow eyes, and skin stretched tight over an angular face. His suit was antiquated, the high collar and dark cravat stained with age. Emma gasped. Thomas Fairchild? His eyes glittered dark as obsidian. I built this house to hold my secrets. I won't let you tear them down. Emma swallowed hard. Lydia deserves justice. People deserve to know what you did. Thomas's expression twisted with something between sorrow and fury. You think the truth will set them free? It will destroy Ashwick. Ruin lives. My ledgers hold the sins of every family in this town. Exposing me will expose them all. Emma gripped the ledger tighter. They deserve the truth, even if it's painful. Thomas took another step down the stairs. Shadows gathered around him like living things, coiling and shifting. You're clever, he murmured. But you're meddling in matters older and darker than you can imagine. Emma's voice hardened. I'm not afraid of you. A flicker of regret crossed Thomas's face. You should be. Because once you know the truth, you belong to this house same as I do. Emma felt her skin prickle at Thomas's words. I don't belong to this house, she shot back. And neither did Lydia. Thomas's gaze turned distant, as if he were peering back through decades of memory. Lydia, he murmured, voice softening. She was the only light in this cursed place. Emma tightened her grip on the ledger. Then why did you hurt her? Thomas clenched his jaw. I didn't want to hurt her. But she wouldn't stay silent. She was going to ruin everything. My business, my reputation, this town. She left me no choice. Emma's voice broke. You killed her. Thomas flinched as though struck. No, he shouted, shadows boiling around him. I never meant for her to die. She ran out into the storm. I tried to stop her. She slipped, fell into the river. I searched for her for days. But the river kept her secret. A wave of sorrow rolled off him so palpable that Emma felt her own eyes sting. Then why haunt this house? She demanded. Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. Because my sins are built into these walls. I can't leave them behind. Emma shook her head. Lydia wants peace. She wants the truth told. Thomas reached the bottom step, eyes shining wetly. If you reveal what's in those books, Ashwick will never be the same. Emma lifted the ledger between them like a shield. Then so be it. Thomas stared at her, shadows swirling. Slowly, he lifted a hand toward the ledger, trembling fingers brushing the leather cover. Please, he murmured, voice cracking. Don't make me fade completely. Emma's heart twisted as she looked into Thomas's anguished eyes. For a fleeting moment he seemed less like a monster and more like a man trapped in his own guilt. Lydia deserves justice, she said gently. You can't keep this buried forever. Thomas lowered his hand, shadows slipping from his fingers like smoke. Justice, he echoed bitterly. There's no justice left for the dead. Only consequences for the living. Emma hesitated. People deserve to know who you really were. What you did. Thomas's voice turned soft, weary. I built Ashwick with these secrets. The foundations of this town are soaked in blood and silence. Exposing me means tearing the town apart. Can you live with that? Emma swallowed hard. She pictured Mrs. Simmons at the library, the shopkeepers, Mrs. Hargrove. Could she truly bring ruin to the town she loved? But then she remembered Lydia's tearful eyes, the whisper of help me echoing in her dreams. I can't let your sins stay hidden, Emma said, steadier now. Not if it means leaving Lydia trapped here. Thomas seemed to shrink, shadows peeling away to reveal a man aged beyond death. Then, you must take the ledgers and leave this house, before I lose the strength to hold back what waits in the walls. Emma shivered. What do you mean? He stared past her, eyes hollow. The house, it's hungry for secrets. For pain. It feeds on those who linger too long. A faint creaking echoed above them, as though unseen footsteps moved through the house. Dust drifted from the ceiling like falling ash. Thomas met Emma's eyes. Go. Now. Emma stared at Thomas, torn between fear and compassion. Come with me, she pleaded. Maybe you can finally be free. Thomas's expression was one of deep sorrow. My time ended long ago, Emma. I'm bound to these walls. My punishment is to remain and remember. Another low rumble vibrated through the stone beneath their feet. The shadows in the corners of the cellar writhed like living creatures, twisting into vague, inhuman shapes. Emma clutched the ledger tighter. What's happening? Thomas's voice dropped to a rasp. The house knows you've uncovered its secrets. It wants to keep them. And it wants to keep you. A chill slithered up Emma's spine as cold air gusted through the chamber. Papers fluttered wildly around them. Thomas gestured frantically toward the stairs. Go, Emma. Before it closes around you. Emma turned, but as she reached the steps, the shadows surged forward, spilling across the floor like ink. An unseen force slammed into her chest, hurling her backward into a shelf. The lantern clattered to the ground, its light sputtering. Thomas shouted, his voice echoing like a funeral bell. Fight it! Don't let it hold you! Emma struggled against invisible pressure pinning her to the wall. The shadows seemed to press into her skin, cold and suffocating. She gasped, forcing words past her lips. Lydia, help me! For a moment, all fell still. Then a soft glow blossomed in the darkness, a warm, golden light that pushed the shadows back. Lydia appeared beside Emma, lantern raised high, her face calm and determined. Leave her be, Lydia commanded. The shadows recoiled at Lydia's voice, slithering back into the corners of the cellar. The crushing weight pressing Emma against the wall eased, and she slid to the floor, gasping for breath. Lydia knelt beside her, lantern casting a protective circle of golden light. The house cannot claim you if you stand in truth, she whispered. Hold fast, Emma. Emma swallowed hard, still clutching the ledger. I'm trying, but it's so strong. Thomas stepped closer, his face drawn and pale. Lydia, you shouldn't be here. The house will turn on you. Lydia lifted her chin. It already has. For decades. I will not let it take her too. Emma looked between them. Thomas, help us! You know how to stop it! Thomas hesitated, eyes darting toward the dark recesses of the cellar. The house feeds on secrets, on silence. If you carry the truth beyond its walls, it will lose its hold. Emma forced herself upright. Then I have to leave. I have to tell people what happened. Thomas's eyes glistened. If you walk out that door, I'll fade forever. I'll be nothing. Lydia placed a gentle hand on his arm. Then find peace, Thomas. Let go of this place. He stared at her hand as though it burned him, then lifted his gaze to Emma. Promise me one thing. Tell them. I loved her. Emma blinked away sudden tears. I promise. A loud cracking sound split the air. The walls shuddered violently. Stone dust rained down as a fissure opened in the floor, blackness yawning beneath. Lydia gripped Emma's arm. We must go. Now! Emma stumbled as Lydia pulled her toward the stairs. The ground beneath them lurched again, and shelves toppled, spilling ledgers and loose pages into the widening crack in the floor. Don't let go! Lydia urged, her spectral fingers surprisingly solid against Emma's wrist. Thomas remained near the split in the stone, watching them flee. His eyes glistened, and his voice echoed softly. Emma, remember your promise. I will, she cried, voice trembling. Lydia hauled Emma up the stairs, the lantern's glow blazing brighter with every step. Shadows surged after them like a rising tide, hissing and clawing at the edges of the light. As they burst into the office above, the floorboards heaved violently, buckling beneath their feet. Cracks spidered outward, splitting the walls. Emma tightened her grip on the ledger, holding it to her chest as if it were her own beating heart. Keep going! Lydia urged, pulling her into the hallway. They raced through the house as the structure groaned and shuddered. Chandeliers swung wildly overhead. Portraits crashed from the walls. A cold wind howled through open doorways, carrying whispers and countless voices. Stay, stay, stay. Emma forced her way toward the front door, each step feeling like wading through invisible resistance. She could feel the house fighting her, tugging at her hair and clothes, trying to drag her back. Emma! Lydia shouted. The threshold! Cross it! Emma lunged for the door, fingers grasping the brass handle. She threw it open, moonlight flooding in. The wind from outside rushed to meet her, cool and clean. Behind her, Lydia's voice rang out, calm and resolute. Go. Live. Emma stumbled across the threshold and onto the porch. The instant her feet hit the outside world, the pressure gripping her chest released, as if invisible chains had snapped apart. She whirled back to look for Lydia, but the hallway beyond the doorway was already changing. The lantern glow dimmed. Shadows closed in like a curtain. Lydia! Emma shouted. For an instant, Lydia stood in the doorway, haloed in fading golden light. She smiled, a gentle, sorrowful expression. Thank you, she whispered. Remember me kindly. Then, like mist dissolving under sunlight, Lydia vanished. The door slammed shut, rattling the porch floorboards. Emma gasped, chest heaving. She staggered back, gripping the ledger so hard her knuckles went white. The house loomed silent and dark, its windows like blank eyes. But the stillness didn't last. A violent tremor shook the entire structure. The roof groaned, and a spidery web of cracks crawled up the brick walls. Glass shattered, raining onto the porch like ice. Emma backed away as a tremendous roar echoed from deep within the house. For a moment, it seemed as if the building might collapse entirely, but then the trembling stilled, leaving the house sagging and battered, yet somehow still standing. A hush settled over Lantern Lane. Fog curled around Emma's ankles as she stared at the quiet house, unsure whether she just witnessed its death, or its final surrender. Slowly, she turned away, clutching the ledger to her chest. The truth weighed heavy in her arms. And behind her, the house on Lantern Lane watched in silence. Emma walked unsteadily down Lantern Lane, the weight of the ledger pressing into her chest like a second heartbeat. The fog swallowed her footsteps, softening the edges of the cobblestones and the faint glow of the street lamps overhead. As she neared the corner, she almost collided with Mrs. Hargrove, who stood clutching her cane, eyes wide. "Child! What in heaven's name happened?" The whole street shook. Emma tried to answer, but words tangled in her throat. Mrs. Hargrove peered past her toward the Fairchild house. "You went inside, didn't you?" Emma nodded. "Lydia, she was real. And Thomas, She broke off, pressing a trembling hand to her lips. Mrs. Hargrove gently took her elbow. "Come on, love. Let's get you home. You're freezing." Emma let herself be guided away. They reached Mrs. Hargrove's cozy kitchen, where the scent of chamomile tea and wood smoke filled the air. Seated at the table, Emma finally spoke. "I have proof, Mrs. Hargrove. Ledgers. Letters. Everything Thomas Fairchild did." Mrs. Hargrove poured tea into a china cup, her hands surprisingly steady. "Are you sure you want to open all those wounds? Ashwick has a long memory, and sometimes it's kinder to leave ghosts sleeping." Emma stared into her tea, steam curling around her face. "Lydia can't rest unless the truth comes out." "Neither can I." Mrs. Hargrove sighed. "Then you'd better be ready, child. Because when secrets come to light, so do enemies." Emma looked up, determination heartening in her eyes. "Let them come." Outside, the fog pressed close to the windows, as though listening. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with rain. Ashwick's streets glistened under the drizzle, and shopkeepers huddled in doorways, casting wary glances toward Lantern Lane. Emma walked briskly toward the library, the wrapped ledger under her arm. Every step felt like marching toward a storm. Inside, the library smelled of wet coats and old books. Mrs. Simmons looked up from the circulation desk. "Emma! You're in early." Emma set the ledger down gently. "I need to look through old town records. And I need a safe place to keep this." Mrs. Simmons eyed the bundle warily. "This has to do with the Fairchild house, doesn't it?" Emma nodded. "Thomas kept records of blackmail, disappearances, crimes that shaped this entire town." Mrs. Simmons sighed, removing her glasses and rubbing her temples. "I knew there were rumors, but I never imagined it was all true," Emma whispered. "He killed Lydia, or drove her to her death." Mrs. Simmons went still. "What will you do?" Emma swallowed. "I'm going to write the truth. Publish it if I have to. People deserve to know." Mrs. Simmons studied her, eyes glinting. "Then you'll need help. And protection. Secrets like this don't stay buried because people simply forget. They're buried because someone makes sure they stay hidden." Emma nodded firmly. "I'm ready." Mrs. Simmons drew closer, lowering her voice. "Leave the ledger here. I'll lock it in the archives. You do your research, and keep your head down for now." Emma managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." Outside, rain pelted the library windows, drumming like a warning. For the next few days, Emma buried herself in research. She pored over birth records, property deeds, newspaper archives, all while the rain continued to fall over Ashwick in relentless gray sheets. Each document she unearthed painted a darker picture. Thomas Fairchild hadn't just been a ruthless businessman. He'd controlled half the town through threats and secrets. Emma filled a notebook with names, dates, and connections. The deeper she dug, the more faces she recognized from everyday life in Ashwick, descendants of people who'd once paid Thomas Fairchild to keep their sins hidden. Late one evening, she sat alone in the library's dim reading room, light from a single lamp spilling across faded pages. Her eyes felt gritty, and fatigue buzzed behind her temples. She closed the last ledger with a thump and whispered to the silent shelves. "No wonder Lydia couldn't rest." A creak interrupted the hush. Emma glanced up sharply. "Mrs. Simmons stood in the doorway, her silhouette outlined by the soft glow of the hall lights. "You're still here, dear?" Mrs. Simmons asked gently. Emma nodded. "I think I'm close to understanding how it all fits together." Mrs. Simmons stepped closer. "Be careful, Emma. People will go to great lengths to protect family legacies. Emma looked into her wise eyes. I won't stop. Even if the town hates me for it. Mrs. Simmons gave a tired smile. Then let's make sure you stay alive to tell the story. As they stood together among the hush of books, Emma felt something shift inside her, a resolve stronger than fear. The following morning, Emma carried her notes into Mrs. Simmons's office, where dust motes floated in the pale sun streaming through tall windows. I think I know why Lydia ran out into the storm, Emma said, voice low. Mrs. Simmons leaned forward, hands folded on her desk. Go on. Emma laid out the letters she'd copied in her pages of notes. Lydia discovered Thomas was laundering money through the church and bribing officials to silence scandals. She confronted him, and he threatened her. Mrs. Simmons nodded gravely. And then she fled. Emma swallowed hard. But Thomas followed her. He claimed she fell into the river. But what if he pushed her? Mrs. Simmons hesitated. Do you have proof? Emma spread the ledgers open to a specific page. Here. The night Lydia disappeared, Thomas made 2 large payments labeled quiet arrangements. One went to the constable. The other, to a Reverend Carter. Mrs. Simmons stiffened. Carter, that family's still in town. Emma nodded. They've held positions of influence for generations. A knock interrupted them. Both women turned as Mrs. Hargrove shuffled into the office, leaning on her cane. I hear you're planning to air the Fairchild's dirty laundry, Mrs. Hargrove said, voice stern. Emma braced herself. I have to. Lydia deserves justice. Mrs. Hargrove sighed deeply. Then you'd better know, child, the dead aren't the only ones who'll try to stop you. Emma met her gaze, unflinching. Let them try. Outside, sunlight struggled through heavy clouds, casting bars of light and shadow across the worn carpet. That evening, Emma left the library and walked through Ashwick's quiet streets, her mind spinning with fear and determination. The rain had eased to a fine mist, leaving the air sharp and cool. Passing Lantern Lane, she paused. The Fairchild house loomed silent, its windows dark as empty sockets. Despite everything, she felt a strange pull toward it, a lingering connection to Lydia. Emma. She spun around. Mrs. Hargrove stood behind her, bundled in her shawl, eyes sharp beneath her knitted cap. Mrs. Hargrove, you scared me. The old woman gave a soft chuckle. Not half as scared as you ought to be, child. You've stirred up old ghosts, and living ones. Emma frowned. I can't stop now. Mrs. Hargrove stepped closer, lowering her voice. Do you know why the Fairchild house never falls down, no matter how it shakes and groans? Emma blinked. No, why? Because it's bound by secrets, Mrs. Hargrove whispered. The house was built over something dark. Even Thomas Fairchild couldn't control it entirely. Emma shivered. Is that why it tried to keep me inside? Mrs. Hargrove nodded. That house is a snare. It feeds on lies, grief, guilt. And it knows you're the key to ending it. Emma stared at the looming silhouette of the house. Then I have to finish what I started. Mrs. Hargrove laid a thin, cool hand on her arm. Be careful. Because the house isn't the only thing watching you now. Emma felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck as she turned to look down the street. A figure stood in the fog, watching her silently. Emma squinted into the fog, heart pounding. The figure remained motionless, partly obscured by drifting mist. Who is that? Emma murmured. Mrs. Hargrove frowned. Don't stare too long, child. Whoever's watching won't like being noticed. But Emma took a step forward. Hey! Who's there? For a moment, the figure stayed perfectly still. Then it turned and melted into the fog, leaving only the soft echo of footsteps fading away. Emma exhaled shakily. Someone's following me. Mrs. Hargrove nodded grimly. People who protect secrets don't always wear ghostly faces, Emma. Emma turned back toward the Fairchild house. I don't care who they are. I'm not stopping. Mrs. Hargrove sighed. Then you'd better be prepared for the living to fight just as hard as the dead. They walked the rest of the way to Mrs. Hargrove's cottage in silence. Inside, the warmth of the small parlor wrapped around Emma like a blanket. The scent of rosemary and old wood filled the air. Mrs. Hargrove settled into her rocking chair. You know, Lydia tried to expose Thomas once before. Emma's eyes widened. You knew her? The old woman nodded slowly. Not well. I was just a girl when she disappeared. But I remember the fear in my parents' voices. People said Lydia was mad, but others whispered she was brave, and that Thomas was the monster. Emma clenched her hands. Lydia deserves to be remembered as brave. Mrs. Hargrove met her gaze, eyes glimmering with something fierce. Then finish what she started. And be careful who you trust. Outside, the wind hissed around the eaves, carrying the faint scent of river water. The following morning dawned cool and bright, a rare gift after so many days of rain. But Emma felt no relief as she made her way to the library, the ledger carefully hidden in a satchel beneath her coat. Halfway there, she sensed footsteps behind her. She glanced back, catching a glimpse of a man in a dark overcoat, moving quickly to duck into an alley. Emma's pulse quickened. She arrived at the library and locked the door behind her. Mrs. Simmons was waiting in the lobby, brows knit. Emma, I've seen men watching the library. Standing by the fence. Pretending to read newspapers. Emma dropped her bag onto the table. They're trying to scare me. Mrs. Simmons lowered her voice. Scare you, or silence you. Emma opened the satchel and pulled out the ledger. I'm going to finish reading it today. I'll write it all down. Everything. Mrs. Simmons reached across the table, gripping Emma's hand. If they threaten you, you must leave Ashwick. Emma met her gaze firmly. I won't leave. Lydia's voice deserves to be heard. Mrs. Simmons hesitated, then nodded. Then I'll stand with you. They worked in silence for hours. Emma turned page after page, her pen flying over sheets of paper as she documented the network of corruption. By late afternoon, her eyes burned with exhaustion. She pushed the ledger aside and rubbed her temples. Suddenly, a sharp rap sounded at the library's door. Emma froze, exchanging a look with Mrs. Simmons. Don't answer it, Mrs. Simmons whispered. But the knock came again, harder this time. Miss Hartley? Called a voice. We need to speak with you. Emma's blood ran cold. Emma and Mrs. Simmons exchanged a silent look. The voice outside sounded calm, but it carried a steely edge. Miss Hartley, the man called again. We know you're inside. Open the door, please. Mrs. Simmons leaned closer, whispering urgently. Don't let them in. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. She moved the ledger and her notes beneath the counter, tucking them into a narrow gap between shelves. The man knocked a third time, louder now. We simply want to ask you some questions. About the Fairchild property. Emma swallowed. They know. Mrs. Simmons whispered. We'll tell them nothing. The knob rattled as someone tested it from the outside. Emma squared her shoulders and raised her voice. The library's closed today. Come back another time. Silence fell. For a moment, Emma thought they'd left. Then a voice, low and dangerous, said, Miss Hartley, we strongly advise you to open the door. For your own safety. Mrs. Simmons gripped Emma's arm. Upstairs. Now. They hurried into the shadowy stairwell, their footsteps muffled on the worn carpet. Emma's breath came fast and shallow. She clutched the hidden ledger like a lifeline. From below came a thud, a hard, deliberate blow against the door. Another. And another. Emma flinched with each impact. Mrs. Simmons hissed. They're trying to break in. Emma felt her resolve crystallize like ice. They're not taking this from me. Or from Lydia. Downstairs, wood splintered as the door gave way. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Someone barked. Find her! Emma and Mrs. Simmons crouched near the top of the staircase, holding their breath. Below, men fanned out across the library's main floor, boots thudding against marble tiles. She has to be here, one growled. Search everywhere. Mrs. Simmons leaned close to Emma's ear. If they find us, say nothing. Let me talk. Emma clutched her satchel tighter. A wave of fear rolled through her, but beneath it simmered an iron determination. Footsteps approached the stairs. A flashlight beam sliced through the shadows, climbing higher, closer. Emma squeezed her eyes shut. Clear upstairs. Another voice called suddenly. She's not here. The man on the stairs paused, swore under his breath, then retreated. Emma dared a glance through the banister. 3 men in dark coats prowled among the shelves, rifling through books, opening cabinets. They're looking for the ledger, Emma whispered. Mrs. Simmons nodded grimly. And they'll tear this place apart to find it. Emma clenched her jaw. We have to get out. Before they come back up. Mrs. Simmons touched her shoulder. There's a back stair. Leads to the alley. Careful as mice, they crept along the upper balcony, shadows shielding them from view. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as they slipped through a narrow door marked staff only. The stairwell smelled of damp plaster and dust. Emma tightened her grip on the satchel, praying the ledger remained hidden. Downstairs, a voice barked. Check the archives! Emma's breath caught. The men were getting closer to the ledger's hiding place. Mrs. Simmons urged her onward. Hurry! They slipped out into the misty alley, the chill air stinging Emma's face. Outside, rain drizzled in fine silver threads, soaking Emma's hair and dripping from the edges of Mrs. Simmons's shawl. The alley was narrow and dark, littered with puddles and old crates. Mrs. Simmons whispered, We'll go to my cottage. Hide there until we decide what to do. Emma nodded, glancing back at the library's rear door. She could still hear muffled crashes as the men tore the building apart. They kept to the shadows, winding through back lanes until Mrs. Simmons's little brick cottage came into view, nestled between tall hedges. Once inside, Mrs. Simmons bolted the door and pulled thick curtains over the windows. Emma collapsed into a chair, shaking. They were going to destroy everything. The ledger, the truth. Mrs. Simmons set a kettle on the stove, her hands trembling only slightly. They'll try again. The Fairchild secrets are poison, Emma. They've seeped into every corner of this town. Emma pulled the satchel into her lap and opened it, checking that the ledger was still safe. I won't let them silence Lydia. Or me. Mrs. Simmons sank into a chair across from her. Then we'll have to be clever. If you simply publish the ledger, they'll discredit you, or worse. Emma stared into the steam rising from the kettle. Then how? Mrs. Simmons's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. We gather witnesses. People who remember Lydia. People willing to speak. And we release the truth all at once, so it can't be buried again. Emma felt hope stir. A reckoning. Mrs. Simmons nodded. A reckoning. For Thomas Fairchild, and for Ashwick. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Over the next days, Emma and Mrs. Simmons worked in secrecy. They sent quiet messages to townsfolk who might know pieces of Lydia's story, older residents, shopkeepers, even retired clergy. Some were afraid to talk. Others wept as they recounted whispers from decades ago, rumors of Lydia screaming in the night, of Thomas pacing Lantern Lane in a fury, lanterns swinging in his hand. Emma wrote it all down. One rainy afternoon, Mrs. Hargrove arrived at the cottage, her cane tapping sharply on the floor. I've been thinking, child, she announced without preamble. And I've decided I'll speak for Lydia too. Emma blinked. Mrs. Hargrove, are you sure? The old woman gave her a fierce look. I may be old, but I've outlived most of Ashwick's secrets. It's time the truth saw daylight. Emma felt gratitude swell in her chest. Thank you. You'll help others find courage. Mrs. Hargrove settled into a chair with a sigh. Lydia always deserved better. Thomas was charming, but he had a temper like a snapping hound. People were afraid of him even when he was alive. Emma scribbled notes furiously as Mrs. Hargrove spoke. When she finished, Mrs. Hargrove laid a gnarled hand on Emma's. Don't let them frighten you off this path, child. Emma met her eyes, steady and determined. I won't. Outside, the rain slackened, and pale sunlight broke through the clouds. It spilled across the kitchen table, catching the edge of Lydia's photograph where Emma had set it down. For the first time in days, Emma felt a fragile spark of hope. That night, Emma lay awake on the small sofa in Mrs. Simmons's parlor. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, painting silver bars across the rug. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas's hollow stare and Lydia's pleading face. At last, she sat up and reached for her notebook. By the glow of a tiny lamp, she began writing the first lines of Lydia's story, determined that it would finally be told. The House on Lantern Lane, by Emma Hartley. Lydia Fairchild was never mad. She was brave. She tried to save Ashwick from the darkness hidden behind elegant doors and polite smiles. This is her story, and the story of the house that would not let her go. A soft creak made Emma freeze. She glanced toward the window. A shadow shifted outside, passing slowly along the hedge. She snapped the lamp off and held her breath. A man's voice drifted through the glass, low and muttering. We warned her. She doesn't understand. Emma's blood ran cold. She crawled across the floor and peered through the curtains. Two men in dark coats stood on the street, faces barely visible in the moonlight. One said, If she releases that ledger, we're all ruined. We can't let it happen. Emma's fingers curled into fists. The other man spat into the road. Then make sure she disappears, like Lydia did. Emma pulled back, trembling. For a moment, she thought she might be sick. But then anger surged through her. She flipped her notebook open again and kept writing, faster than ever. Morning dawned pale and cold, streaks of sunlight slipping through gaps in the clouds. Emma felt the weight of sleepless hours, but she was more determined than ever. Over tea, she told Mrs. Simmons and Mrs. Hargrove what she'd overheard outside the window. They want me gone, Emma whispered. Mrs. Simmons set down her teacup with a sharp clink. Then we'll strike first. Mrs. Hargrove leaned forward, eyes gleaming. You've got more friends in this town than they think. People are tired of the shadows. Emma looked between them. Then it's time. We release Lydia's story, and the ledgers. Mrs. Simmons nodded. We'll publish copies and leave them in places where everyone will see. The church. The post office. The general store. Mrs. Hargrove added. And you'll speak at the town meeting. Tell them yourself. Emma's breath caught. A town meeting? Mrs. Hargrove thumped her cane. Better they hear it from your lips than twisted rumors. Besides, Lydia deserves to have her name cleared in public. Emma felt fear claw at her chest, but beneath it glowed an ember of courage. Then I'll speak. Mrs. Simmons squeezed her hand. Good girl. For the rest of the day, they worked feverishly. Emma typed Lydia's story into neat pages, while Mrs. Simmons prepared copies of key ledger entries. Mrs. Hargrove penned a statement in her own spidery handwriting, vowing to stand beside Emma and confirm Lydia's innocence. As dusk fell, Emma gazed at the neat stacks of paper spread across the table. A storm was coming, but this time, she was ready to face it. The morning of the town meeting arrived crisp and clear, as though Ashwick itself was holding its breath. Emma dressed in her plain gray coat and tied her hair back firmly, trying to calm the fluttering panic in her chest. Mrs. Simmons and Mrs. Hargrove flanked her as they walked toward the town hall. A few townsfolk stood along the sidewalks, watching them with wary, curious eyes. Near the square, Emma saw the two men who'd lurked outside the cottage. They stood stiffly among the gathering crowd, avoiding her gaze. Inside the hall, wooden benches filled quickly. The air buzzed with low conversation. Emma's palms felt damp as she approached the podium. Mrs. Simmons squeezed her arm. We're right here. Speak your truth. Mrs. Hargrove gave a fierce nod. Lydia's watching over you. Emma stepped up to the podium. The microphone crackled to life. She looked out at the townspeople, shopkeepers, teachers, church elders, people she'd known her whole life. Some stared at her with suspicion. Others with quiet hope. Emma took a deep breath. I stand here today because a woman named Lydia Fairchild deserves her story told. She began, voice trembling but strong. She wasn't mad. She wasn't hysterical. She was brave. She tried to expose terrible secrets hidden in our town. A ripple went through the crowd. Emma held up the ledger. This book holds proof of corruption, blackmail, and the suffering of countless families, including Lydia's own death. The room erupted into murmurs, shock and fear flashing in the faces around her. Emma pressed on. Ashwick has lived in the shadow of Thomas Fairchild's crimes for too long. It's time for the truth. Emma's voice gained strength as she looked out over the sea of faces. Lydia tried to tell the truth. She tried to save Ashwick from the darkness that lived behind fine curtains and polite smiles. Instead, she was silenced. But she has spoken to me. And she deserves justice. Gasps echoed through the hall. Mrs. Simmons and Mrs. Hargrove stood beside the podium, fierce and unflinching. One man near the front leapt to his feet. This is slander, he shouted. You're tarnishing good families' names. Emma met his eyes steadily. Good families don't pay to cover up murder and blackmail. A woman spoke up shakily. My grandmother told me Lydia wasn't crazy, that she was afraid of her husband. Another man rose, voice cracking. My great-uncle vanished around that time. No one ever explained why. The room buzzed louder. Arguments flared. People shouted names, accusations, half-remembered secrets. Emma raised her hands. Please listen. This isn't about destroying Ashwick. It's about freeing it from a lie that's haunted us for generations. Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward, leaning heavily on her cane. I was there, folks. I remember the night Lydia vanished. I remember Thomas Fairchild's rage. The town's silence was our shame. A hush fell over the room. Emma held up the ledger. These pages hold the truth. I'm not asking you to believe me blindly. I'm asking you to read this yourselves and decide what kind of town we want Ashwick to be. A murmur rippled through the hall, a tremor of possibility. Silence hung in the hall like breath held too long. Emma felt her pulse thunder as she lowered the ledger, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak. Then a frail voice rose from the middle rows. I knew Lydia, said Mrs. Penrose, an elderly woman clutching a lace handkerchief. She helped my mother when we had no food. She was kind, gentle. I always believed Thomas drove her to her death. The room shifted, people turning toward Mrs. Penrose in surprise. A middle-aged man cleared his throat. My grandfather worked for Fairchild. He said Thomas ruined men who crossed him. Maybe Lydia tried to stop him. Emma blinked back tears. For the first time, she felt the tide turning. But the two men Emma had seen lurking outside the cottage stepped forward. One glared at Emma. You think you're saving this town? You'll tear it apart. People's families, reputations, gone overnight. Emma faced him squarely. Then those reputations were built on lies. Lydia deserves better. Mrs. Hargrove slammed her cane against the floor. This town needs the truth, or ghosts will keep haunting our doorsteps forever. The second man tried to shout back, but murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Emma opened the ledger and began reading aloud, entries of hushed payments, threats, coded references to disappearances. Gasps and sobs punctuated her words. When she finished, the hall was utterly still. Emma lowered her voice. The house on Lantern Lane is more than bricks and mortar. It's a prison built from secrets. Let's tear it down, together. A long, trembling silence followed Emma's final words. She felt the weight of every eye upon her, the hush like the pause before a storm. Then, slowly, Mrs. Penrose stood again. Her voice quavered but rang clear. I believe Lydia deserves justice. I believe Emma speaks the truth. Murmurs of assent rose around her. One by one, others stood, shopkeepers, teachers, townsfolk Emma had known all her life. A gray-haired man said, We can't pretend anymore. Too many ghosts. Someone else whispered, Ashwick deserves better. Even those who'd shouted earlier fell quiet, shame or fear clouding their expressions. Emma felt her breath catch, tears stinging her eyes. She gripped the podium as if it anchored her to the earth. Mrs. Simmons stepped forward. "We'll make copies of the ledger. We'll give one to the police, one to the press. No one will bury this truth again." Mrs. Hargrove lifted her cane. "And if anyone threatens this child, they'll answer to all of Ashwick." A wave of applause began softly, then grew. The sound filled the hall like rising thunder. Emma blinked rapidly, overwhelmed by the sight of so many people standing beside her. The two men who tried to silence her slipped quietly toward the door, faces pale, vanishing into the gathering storm outside. Emma took a shaky breath, speaking into the microphone one last time. "Thank you. For Lydia. For Ashwick. For believing the truth matters." The applause surged again, echoing off the timber rafters, shaking dust from beams older than any living soul in the room. As the crowd slowly dispersed, people approached Emma to thank her, to share memories of Lydia, or to confess secrets they'd kept buried for decades. An older woman clasped Emma's hands. "I remember Lydia singing in church. She deserved better," a young man whispered. "My family was afraid to speak. Thank you for being brave enough." Emma listened to every voice, feeling both exhausted and lighter than she had in weeks. Mrs. Simmons drew her aside. "There'll be consequences, Emma. Some people will hate you for this." Emma nodded. "I know. But Ashwick deserves the truth." Mrs. Hargrove appeared at her side, eyes sparkling. "You've lifted a weight from this town's chest. Lydia can rest now." Emma swallowed hard. Do you really think so?" Mrs. Hargrove smiled. "Go see for yourself." That night, under a sky littered with stars, Emma walked alone down Lantern Lane. The Fairchild house stood silent, its windows dark. She stood at the gate, breath misting in the cool air. A hush hung over the street, as though the house itself was listening. Slowly, light bloomed behind the second-story window, a soft, golden glow. Emma's chest tightened as Lydia's figure appeared, her lantern lifted high. This time, Lydia's face was serene. She smiled at Emma, a true, gentle smile, and nodded once before fading away into the glow. The lantern light winked out. Emma stared at the empty window, tears on her cheeks. "Rest well, Lydia." Then she turned and walked home beneath the stars, the night no longer quite so heavy. Over the following weeks, Ashwick began to change. Emma and Mrs. Simmons worked tirelessly to share Lydia's story. Copies of the ledger spread through the town like ripples in water. Newspapers published headlines that stunned readers far beyond Ashwick's borders. Ashwick town heroine's story finally told. Corruption unearthed in historic Fairchild ledgers. People gathered in hushed circles outside shops, talking about Thomas Fairchild's crimes. There was sorrow, shock, and relief. Some families struggled with shame. Others felt freed, as though a long-standing curse had lifted. The Fairchild name, once spoken with reverence, became a cautionary tale. Emma kept working at the library, though strangers sometimes stopped her on the street to thank her, or, occasionally, to glare. But she held her head high, knowing she'd done the right thing. Mrs. Hargrove became a quiet celebrity in town. She gave interviews to reporters, telling them firmly, "It's never too late for truth." One sunny afternoon, Emma stood outside the house on Lantern Lane, staring up at its weathered bricks. Workers milled about, discussing plans to renovate the old mansion into a historical museum. A young architect approached Emma, rolling up blueprints. "We're going to preserve the structure," he said. "But tell the real story. Lydia's story." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "That's perfect." As she turned to leave, she glanced back at the second-floor window. For just an instant, she thought she saw a lantern flicker there, soft, golden light shining like hope. Then it faded, leaving the house still and quiet. Emma stepped away from Lantern Lane with a quiet sense of closure blooming in her chest. She felt lighter, as though some invisible chain had been cut free. Back at the library, she found Mrs. Simmons organizing return books. How's our heroine today? Mrs. Simmons asked with a knowing smile. Emma laughed softly. Tired. But good. Mrs. Simmons tilted her head. Regrets? Emma paused, considering. No. Not for telling the truth. Though, I do wish Lydia could have lived to see Ashwick change. Mrs. Simmons patted her arm. In a way, she has. Through you. Emma blinked back sudden tears. I hope she's at peace. Mrs. Simmons smiled. I'm certain of it. That evening, Mrs. Hargrove joined them for tea in the library's reading room. She settled into a chair with a satisfied sigh. I hear the Fairchild House will be a museum, Mrs. Hargrove said, sipping her tea. About time that place told the truth instead of hiding it. Emma nodded. I'm glad Lydia's story will be part of it. Not just the tragedy, but her courage. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes sparkled. You've given Ashwick a gift, Emma? And given Lydia her voice back. Emma felt warmth spread through her chest. I just hope Ashwick keeps listening. Mrs. Hargrove reached for her hand. It will. Because you taught them how. Outside, twilight deepened, the sky painted in shades of lavender and silver. Lanterns along the street flickered to life, their glow soft and steady, a gentle reminder that light always finds a way through darkness. A week later, the town gathered for the official announcement about the Fairchild House's future. The sun shone bright over Ashwick as people filled Lantern Lane, murmuring with curiosity and cautious hope. Emma stood beside the mayor and the young architect, her heart thudding as the mayor addressed the crowd. Today, we turn a page in Ashwick's history, he declared. Thanks to Emma Hartley and those who stood with her, we know the true story behind this house. And now, we will honor Lydia Fairchild and ensure her story is never forgotten. Applause rippled through the crowd. Emma stepped forward. Her voice was steady as she spoke into the microphone. This house was built on secrets. But it will stand now as a monument to truth, and to the courage of a woman who refused to stay silent. The young architect unfurled blueprints showing how the house would be preserved, with exhibits telling Lydia's story and showcasing the ledgers Emma uncovered. Mrs. Hargrove wiped tears from her eyes as she whispered to Emma. She'd be so proud of you. Emma squeezed her hand. I hope she knows. As the mayor unveiled a new plaque near the gate, Emma felt a breeze stir around her. It carried a faint scent of lavender, and for an instant she could almost feel Lydia beside her, calm and radiant. She glanced at the house. Sunlight glinted off its windows, and for the first time, it seemed simply a house, not a prison of shadows. People lingered, reading the plaque, sharing memories, and laughing gently. It was as though Ashwick was exhaling after a lifetime of holding its breath. Emma stood quietly, feeling peace settle deep in her bones. In the days that followed, life in Ashwick slowly found a new rhythm. People still spoke in hushed voices about the Fairchild secrets, but now the conversations held curiosity rather than fear. At the library, patrons came in asking for Emma's written account. Mrs. Simmons printed copies of Emma's manuscript and set them on display. A small handwritten sign read, Lydia Fairchild's True Story, free to read. May Ashwick remember. One afternoon, as Emma organized return books, a young woman approached her hesitantly. Miss Hartley? She said. I'm Amelia Carter. My family was in the ledger. Emma tensed, unsure what might come next. I see. Amelia swallowed. I wanted to say, thank you. For telling the truth. My family kept secrets for generations, and it's like poison. It stops with me. Emma felt relief and warmth spread through her chest. I'm glad. Lydia would be too. Amelia gave a small, sad smile. I've been to the Fairchild house. It doesn't feel so dark anymore. Emma nodded. Because the truth has lightened it. That evening, Emma wandered back down Lantern Lane. The house stood bathed in the glow of new lanterns, fresh paint brightening its tired bricks. A small group of townsfolk stood reading the plaque, speaking softly. Laughter drifted through the air. Children peeked through the iron gates, daring each other to get closer. Emma smiled. For the first time, the house felt like part of Ashwick again, not a secret, not a prison, but a place of memory and learning. She whispered under her breath, "Rest easy, Lydia." Spring arrived in Ashwick with gentle rains and bursts of green in every garden. Lantern Lane was alive with color, yellow daffodils, purple crocuses, and ivy unfurling fresh leaves across the brick walls. Emma sat on a bench across from the Fairchild house, notebook balanced on her knee. She watched as workers installed display cases inside the old house, readying it for its opening as Ashwick's new museum. Children skipped past her, laughing, chasing each other around the iron fence. A pair of teenage girls leaned against the gate, whispering about Lydia's ghost, but their voices were tinged more with wonder than fear. Mrs. Hargrove joined Emma on the bench, her cane tapping gently on the cobblestones. "A fine day for ghosts to rest," she declared, settling beside Emma. Emma grinned. "I think Lydia finally has." Mrs. Hargrove peered toward the house. "People will come from all over to hear her story now." "And yours?" Emma shook her head modestly. "It's Lydia's story. I was just—" The voice she borrowed. Mrs. Hargrove patted her hand. "Every story needs a voice, child. You gave her justice." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the breeze rustle the ivy. Emma thought of Thomas Fairchild, of his anguish and guilt. A pang of sadness rippled through her. "Do you think Thomas ever found peace?" she asked softly. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes twinkled. "I reckon he's finally quiet, wherever he is. And maybe he's watching over Lydia, same as she watched over you." Emma smiled faintly. "I'd like to believe that." Overhead, the bells of Ashwick's church chimed the hour. The town felt lighter, as though centuries of silence had finally lifted. That evening, the Fairchild house opened its doors to the public for the first time. Lanterns glowed along the walkway, casting gentle golden pools of light over the old stones. Emma stood beside Mrs. Simmons and Mrs. Hargrove as townsfolk filed inside, voices hushed with awe and curiosity. The parlor had been transformed into an exhibit space. Behind glass, Lydia's photograph sat beside passages from her letters. Emma's manuscript was displayed open to the first page. People moved slowly, reading, murmuring. A woman dabbed at her eyes. A man stared at the ledgers, shaking his head as though finally understanding pieces of his family's past. Emma felt Lydia's presence everywhere, in the hush of the crowd, in the soft glow of the lanterns. A small girl tugged at Emma's sleeve. "Miss Hartley, is the lady with the lantern happy now?" Emma knelt down, smiling. "Yes. I think she's very happy." The girl beamed and skipped off to join her friends. Mrs. Hargrove leaned close. "You did it, child." Emma looked around the room, heart full. "We did it." They stepped outside into the cool evening air. Stars glittered overhead, and Ashwick's lanterns glowed gently along the streets. Emma glanced back at the house. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw Lydia standing in the upstairs window, lantern lifted high in silent farewell. Emma felt no fear, only gratitude. She whispered, "Thank you, Lydia." And as the lantern lights slowly faded, Emma turned and walked into the night, ready to begin the next chapter of her life, carrying with her the certainty that truth, once spoken, could free even the most haunted of houses.